Tonight, we take a closer look at a major shift in the American auto industry. Two of the world's most respected car makers, Toyota and Honda, are quietly scaling back their US manufacturing presence. This isn't just a business decision, it's a move with far-reaching implications for American jobs, international trade, and the future of the country's economic landscape. For decades, these Japanese automakers were celebrated for their deep investments in American communities. They built factories, hired local workers, and became pillars of small towns across the Midwest and South, creating thousands of stable, well-paying jobs and helping to revitalize entire regions. But now, a slow and deliberate shift is underway. Production lines are running at lower capacity and some assembly stations sit empty. This change is raising tough questions about the impact of recent US trade policies, shifting consumer demand and the global competition that's reshaping the auto industry. This story goes beyond cars. It's about the ripple effects on workers who depend on these jobs, on towns built around these factories, and on the broader American economy that relies on manufacturing as a backbone. The decisions by Toyota and Honda send a clear message to other global companies considering US investment. Their actions could influence whether other international firms choose to expand or pull back in America. We'll examine how ongoing trade wars, new tariffs, and shifting global alliances have played a role in these choices. These factors are making it more challenging and sometimes less attractive for foreign automakers to keep investing in US manufacturing. Our journey tonight takes us from the heated policy debates in Washington, D.C. to the factory floors of Ohio and Indiana, where the effects of these decisions are felt most directly by American workers and their families. We'll hear from industry experts, economists, and the people whose lives are being changed by these corporate pivots. Their insights will help us understand the real-world consequences of these shifts. This is a critical moment for America's role in the global economy. The choices made today will shape the nation's manufacturing future for years to come. To understand today's shifts, we need to revisit America's trade history. For years, free trade agreements like NAFTA encouraged foreign automakers to build cars in the US, creating jobs and revitalizing communities. States competed for these investments, offering incentives and celebrating the economic boost. But not everyone benefited equally. Some regions thrived, while others lost traditional industries. Growing frustration over lost jobs fueled a backlash against globalization. By the mid-2010s, calls for tougher trade policies gained momentum, culminating in the 2016 election. The Trump administration promised to bring jobs back and get tough on trade partners. This marked the end of an era of open trade and the start of a more confrontational approach. Suddenly, long-standing allies like Japan found themselves in the crosshairs. The Trump administration's trade strategy was built around the use of tariffs, essentially taxes on imported goods, as a tool to pressure other countries and protect US industries. The idea was to make foreign products more expensive, encouraging Americans to buy domestically made goods and, in theory, strengthening the US economy. This approach marked a significant shift from previous administrations, which had generally favored free trade and open markets. Steel and aluminum tariffs were among the first to be implemented, and they hit automakers especially hard. Companies like Toyota and Honda, which rely on complex global supply chains to source parts and materials, suddenly faced much higher costs for essential components. These increased expenses rippled through the industry, affecting not just foreign automakers but also American car companies that depended on imported steel and aluminum. The looming threat of even broader auto tariffs created a climate of uncertainty. Automakers were left wondering if their next shipment of vehicles or parts would be subject to new taxes, making it much riskier to commit to long-term investments in US plants and facilities. Automakers faced a difficult dilemma. On one hand, building cars in America now meant dealing with higher production costs due to tariffs on raw materials. On the other hand, importing finished cars from abroad carried the risk of even steeper tariffs, threatening to make their vehicles unaffordable for American consumers. This unpredictable environment forced companies to rethink their entire US manufacturing strategies. Many automakers began to question whether it made sense to expand or even maintain their American operations. While the stated goal of these policies was to boost American jobs and manufacturing, The reality on the ground was often increased costs, confusion and anxiety for both workers and executives. For major automakers like Toyota and Honda, the US market became a less stable and less predictable place to do business, making it harder to plan for the future. The result was a gradual but noticeable shift in production and investment away from the US, as companies looked for more stable environments to build their cars and source their parts. The contradiction at the heart of these policies, trying to protect American jobs while making it more expensive to operate in America, left automakers searching for new solutions and strategies in an increasingly complex global market. The changes we're seeing in the auto industry aren't dramatic, headline-grabbing exits, but rather a series of carefully calculated strategic moves by major automakers. Instead of abrupt shutdowns, companies are quietly shifting resources, adjusting production lines, and rethinking where and how they operate. These decisions are subtle, but their impact is significant, signaling a new era for the industry. For example, Honda's recent retooling of its Ohio plant and Toyota's decision to move SUV production to Japan and Mexico are not just routine business updates. They represent a deliberate recalibration of their US operations, reflecting a broader trend among global automakers to reassess their American footprint. These moves are part of a larger puzzle as companies weigh the benefits and risks of manufacturing in the US versus abroad. Officially, these shifts are framed as necessary adaptations to the rise of electric vehicles and evolving consumer demand. However, there's another layer. By moving production, automakers are also reducing their exposure to US tariffs and trade uncertainties, making their supply chains more resilient in a volatile global market. Announcements of plant consolidations and closures, such as Honda's North Carolina engine plant, began surfacing after the peak of trade tensions between the US and other countries. These closures are often presented as efficiency measures, but they also reflect a cautious approach to future investments in the US. While it's true that no major US assembly plants have shut down entirely, the landscape is changing. Future investments are now being distributed more globally, with automakers choosing to expand in multiple countries rather than concentrating growth in the US alone. This global spread helps companies hedge against regional risks. Increasingly, new battery plants and next-generation automotive technology facilities are being built in Canada and Mexico. These locations offer strategic advantages, from lower costs to easier access to international markets, and are quickly becoming hubs for the industry's future. The strategy behind these moves is clear: reduce risk, diversify operations, and avoid overcommitting to a US market that has become unpredictable due to shifting policies and economic uncertainty. Automakers are planning for long-term stability, not just short-term gains. What we're witnessing is a slow, methodical retreat from the old model, not a sudden or chaotic exit. Production is winding down in some areas, but it's a gradual process, carefully managed to minimize disruption. The era when US auto expansion was automatic and seemingly endless is now over. Today, every investment is scrutinized, and the industry's future is being mapped out with caution and global perspective. Official statements from Toyota and Honda focus on optimization and adapting to market changes. They avoid blaming US policy directly, but the subtext is clear. In private, executives cite rising costs and regulatory uncertainty as major concerns. Industry groups warned early on that tariffs would hurt American jobs and consumers. The public message is business as usual, but behind closed doors there's real anxiety about the US business climate. These companies aren't fleeing, they're making calculated decisions to protect their future. The shift is about de-risking, not panic. Years before these moves, automakers signaled that policy changes could force their hand. Now those warnings are playing out. The lessened policy uncertainty drives companies to quietly diversify away from risk. The impact of these shifts goes far beyond the factory floor. Each lost assembly job affects several more in the supply chain. Local businesses, suppliers, and service providers all feel the pain. Towns built around auto plants like Marysville, Ohio, depend on these jobs for their tax base and economic vitality. Even small reductions can trigger a downward spiral in local economies. For consumers, fewer US-built cars means higher prices and less choice. tariffs add hundreds of dollars to new car prices, acting as a hidden tax on families. Nationally, reduced foreign investment means fewer jobs and slower growth. America's reputation as a top destination for global business is at stake. The ripple effects are economic and reputational. The stakes for communities and the broader economy are enormous. The Trump-era trade disputes strained America's alliance with Japan. Tariff threats against Japanese automakers were seen as an affront despite decades of partnership and investment. Japanese officials pushed back, highlighting their contributions to US jobs and manufacturing. The fallout prompted Japan and other allies to diversify their trade relationships, reducing reliance on the US. This shift weakens America's economic influence and complicates cooperation on global challenges. Even as the Biden administration adopts a softer tone, the memory of tariff threats lingers. Allies now hedge their bets, seeking stability elsewhere. The episode showed that US policy can be unpredictable, prioritizing domestic politics over alliances. Rebuilding trust is slow, and the production shifts by Toyota and Honda are a lasting reminder. The diplomatic cost of trade policy missteps is real and enduring. Experts agree tariffs weren't the only reason for these shifts, but they accelerated the trend. The uncertainty and higher costs made the US less attractive for new investment. Capital flows to where it's treated best. When the US raised barriers, automakers looked to Canada and Mexico. The goal of protecting US industry backfired in a globalized sector where supply chains cross borders. Tariffs made American-built cars more expensive, hurting their competitiveness. The policy misunderstood how modern manufacturing works. Instead of onshoring jobs, it pushed future investment offshore. Costs rose for manufacturers and consumers, while relationships with allies suffered. Toyota and Honda's decisions are rational responses to a tougher US business climate. The lesson: policy choices have real, sometimes unintended consequences. The US must adapt or risk falling behind in the global economy. The story of Toyota and Honda is a lesson in economic cause and effect. Policy decisions ripple through industries, communities, and international relationships. The goal of strengthening American industry is noble, but the approach matters. Instability and confrontation can drive investment away. The US now faces a choice: embrace global supply chains and stability, or risk further isolation. The future of American manufacturing depends on smart, predictable policy. Cooperation, not conflict, built decades of shared prosperity. The next chapter will be written by the choices we make today.